Good evening and welcome to Spiritual Storytime. We're in the midst of Jonathan Livingston Seagull's story. But I also and tonight we're going to finish it, so we may go a little bit longer, and I'm pretty excited to know how this turns out. It sounds pretty spiritual already. And I'd also like to invite you to the retreat. We're actually going to have an all-Germany retreat. I should actually be in Germany, but that was canceled. So we're going to do a Zoom, 7-day Zoom retreat. And we'll be giving some information about that later. And the topic will be on karma, which is interestingly the title of the subject of the book that I'm writing. So I hope that you'll consider. It's going to be, obviously I'm speaking English, and it will be translated into German, but the American side, or the English-speaking group, will be having separate events. Anyway, it'll be interesting, and it's a brand new style for retreats. So I hope you'll join, and if you're already my students, please consider. It begins the Thursday evening before Easter. The Thursday evening before Easter is the beginning of that. Or I'm not sure if it's our time. Anyway, Thursday, like Thursday midday, probably. Anyway, more information. But it's coming up very soon. Today is the 1st, and I think it's the 9th, so not too much time. Jonathan Livingston Seagull. A month went by, or something that felt like a month. And Jonathan learned at a tremendous rate. He had always learned quickly from ordinary experience, and now, the special student of the elder himself, he took in new ideas like a streamlined, feathered computer. But then the day came that Chiang vanished. He had been talking quietly with them all, exhorting them to never stop their learning and their practicing and their striving to understand more of the perfect, invisible principle of all life. Then, as he spoke, his feathers went brighter and brighter, and at last turned so brilliant that no gull could look upon him. Jonathan, he said, and these were the last words that he spoke, keep working on love. When they could see again, Chiang was gone. As the days went past, Jonathan found himself thinking time and again of the earth from which he had come. If he had known there just a tenth, just a hundredth of what he knew here, how much more life would have meant. He stood on the sand and fell to wondering if there was a gull back there who might be struggling to break out of his limits, to see the meaning of flight beyond a way of travel, to get a breadcrumb from a rowboat. Perhaps there might even have been one made outcast for speaking his truth in the face of the flock. And the more Jonathan practiced his kindness lessons, and the more he worked to know the nature of love, the more he wanted to go back to earth. For in spite of his lonely past, Jonathan Seagull was born to be an instructor, and his own way of demonstrating love was to give something of the truth that he had seen to a gull who asked only a chance to see truth for himself. Sullivan, adept now at thought speed flight and helping the others to learn, was doubtful. John, you were outcast once. Why do you think that any of the gulls in your old time would listen to you now? You know the proverb, and it's true. The gull sees farthest who flies highest. Those gulls where you came from are standing on the ground, squawking and fighting among themselves. They're 1,000 miles from heaven. And you say you want to show them heaven from where they stand? John, they can't even see their own wingtips. Stay here. Stay here. Help the new gulls here, the ones who are high enough to see what you have to tell them. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, what if Chiang had gone back to his old worlds? Where would you have been today? The last point was the telling one, and Sullivan was right. The gull sees farthest, who flies highest. Jonathan stayed and worked with the new birds coming in, who were all very bright and quick with their lessons. But the old feeling came back, and he couldn't help but think that there might be 1 or 2 gulls back on Earth who would be able to learn too. How much more would he have known by now if Chiang had come to him on the day that he was outcast? Sully, I must go back, he said at last. Your students are doing well. They can help you bring the newcomers along. Sullivan sighed, but he did not argue. I think I'll miss you, Jonathan, was all he said. Sully, for shame, Jonathan said in reproach, and don't be foolish. What are we trying to practice every day? If our friendship depends on things like space and time, then when we finally overcome space and time, we've destroyed our own brotherhood. But overcome space, and all we have left is here. Overcome time, and all we have left is now. And in the middle of here and now, don't you think that we might see each other once or twice? Sullivan Seagull laughed in spite of himself. You crazy bird, he said kindly. If anybody can show someone on the ground how to see 1,000 miles, it will be Jonathan Livingston Seagull. He looked at the sand. Goodbye, John, my friend. Goodbye, Sully. We'll meet again. And with that, Jonathan held in thought an image of the great gull flocks on the shore of another time, and he knew with practiced ease that he was not bone and feather, but a perfect idea of freedom and flight, limited by nothing at all. Fletcher Lynn Seagull was still quite young, but already he knew that no bird had ever been so harshly treated by any flock or with so much injustice. I don't care what they say, he thought fiercely, and his vision blurred as he flew out toward the far cliffs. There's so much to flying than just flapping around from place to place. A mosquito does that. One little barrel roll around the elder gull, just for fun, and I'm outcast. Are they blind? Can't they see? Can't they think of the glory that it will be when we really learn to fly? I don't care what they think. I'll show them what flying is. I'll be pure outcast, if that's the way they want it, and I'll make them so sorry. The voice came inside his own head, and though it was very gentle, it startled him so much that he faltered and stumbled in the air. Don't be harsh on them, Fletcher Seagull. In casting you out, the other gulls have only hurt themselves, and one day they will know this, and one day they will see what you see. Forgive them and help them to understand. An inch from his right wingtip flew the most brilliant white gull in all the world, gliding effortlessly along, not moving a feather, at what was very nearly Fletcher's top speed. There was a moment of chaos in the young bird. What's going on? Am I mad? Am I dead? What is this? Low and calm, the voice went on within his thought, demanding an answer. Fletcher Lynn Seagull, do you want to fly? Yes, I want to fly. Fletcher Lynn Seagull, do you want to fly so much that you will forgive the flock and learn and go back to them one day and work to help them know? There was no lying to this magnificent, skillful being, no matter how proud or how hurt a bird was Fletcher Seagull. I do, he said softly. Then Fletch, that bright creature, said to him, and the voice was very kind, let's begin with level flight. Jonathan circled slowly over the far cliffs, watching. This rough young Fletcher gull was very nearly a perfect flight student. He was strong and light and quick in the air. But far and away more important, he had a blazing drive to learn to fly. Here he came this minute, a blurred gray shape roaring out of a dive, flashing 150 miles per hour past his instructor. He pulled abruptly into another try at a 16-point vertical slow roll, calling the points out loud. 8, 9, 10. See, Jonathan, I'm running out of airspeed. 11. I want good sharp stops like yours. 12. But blast it, I just can't make 13. These last 3 points without 14. Ah! Fletcher's whip stall at the top was all the worse for his rage and fury at failing. He fell backward, tumbled, slammed savagely into an inverted spin, and recovered at last, panting 100 feet below his instructor's level. You're wasting your time with me, Jonathan. I'm too dumb. I'm too stupid. I try and try, but I never get it. Jonathan Seagull looked down at him and nodded. You'll never get it for sure as long as you make that pull up so hard. Fletcher, you lost 40 miles an hour in that entry. You have to be smooth, firm but smooth, remember? He dropped down to the level of the younger gull. Let's try it together now, in formation, and pay attention to that pull-up. It's a smooth, easy entry. By the end of 3 months, Jonathan had 6 other students, outcasts all, yet curious about this strange new idea of flight for the joy of flying. Still, it was easier for them to practice high performance than it was to understand the reason behind it. Each of us is in truth an idea of the great gull, an unlimited ideal of freedom, Jonathan would say in the evenings on the beach. And precision flying is a step toward expressing our real nature. Everything that limits us, we have to put aside. That's why all this high-speed practice and low-speed and aerobatics. And his students would be asleep, exhausted from the day's flying. They liked the practice because it was fast and exciting, and it fed a hunger for learning that grew with every lesson. But not one of them, not even Fletcher Lynn Gull, had come to believe that the flight of old ideas could possibly be as real as the flight of wind and feather. Your whole body, from wingtip to wingtip, Jonathan would say at other times, is nothing more than your thought itself, in a form you can see, Break the chains of your thought, and you'll break the chains of your body too. But no matter how he said it, it sounded like pleasant fiction, and they needed more to sleep. It was only a month later that Jonathan said the time had come to return to the flock. "We're not ready," said Henry Calvin Gull. "We're not welcome. We're outcast. We can't force ourselves to go where we're not welcome, can we? We're free to go where we wish and to be what we are," Jonathan answered, and he lifted from the sand and turned east toward the home ground of the flock. There was a brief anguish among his students, for it is the law of the flock that an outcast can never return, and the law has not been broken once in 10,000 years. The law said stay, Jonathan said go, and by now he was a mile across the water. If they waited much longer, he would reach the hostile flock alone. "Well, we don't have to obey the law if we're not part of the flock, do we?" Fletcher said rather self-consciously. "Besides, if there's a fight, we'll be a lot more help if there than here." And so they flew in from the west that morning, 8 of them, in a double diamond formation, wingtips almost overlapping. They came across the flock's Council Beach at 135 miles per hour. Jonathan in the lead, Fletcher smoothly at his right wing, Henry Calvin struggling gamely at his left. Then the whole formation rolled slowly to the right as one bird, level, 2, inverted, 2, level, the wind whipping over them all. The squawks and grockles of everyday life in the flock were cut off as though the formation were a giant knife, and 8,000 gull eyes watched them without a single blink. One by one, each of the 8 birds pulled sharply upward into a full loop and flew all the way around to a dead slow stand-up landing on the sand. Then, as though this sort of thing happened every day, Jonathan Seagull began his critique of the flight. "To begin with," he said with a wry smile, "you were all a bit late on the join-up. It went like lightning through the flock. These birds are outcast, and they have returned, and that can't happen." Fletcher's prediction of battle melted in the flock's confusion. "Well, sure, okay, they're outcasts," said some of the younger gulls. "But hey man, where did they learn to fly like that?" It took almost an hour for the word of the elder to pass through the flock. "Ignore them. The gull who speaks to an outcast is himself outcast. The gull who looks upon an outcast breaks the law of the flock." Gray-feathered backs were turned upon Jonathan from that moment onward, but he didn't appear to notice. He held his practice sessions directly over the Council Beach, and for the first time began pressing his students to the limit of their ability. "Martin Gull," he shouted across the sky, "you say you know low-speed flying. You are know nothing till you prove it. Fly!" So quiet little Martin William Seagull, startled to be caught under his instructor's fire, surprised himself and became a wizard of low speeds. In the lightest breeze, he could curve his feathers to lift himself without a single flap of the wing, from sand to cloud and down again. Likewise, Charles Roland Gull flew the great mountain wind to 24,000 feet, came down blue from the cold, thin air, amazed and happy, determined to go still higher tomorrow. Fletcher Seagull, who loved aerobatics like no one else, conquered his 16-point vertical slow roll and the next day topped it off with a triple cartwheel, his feathers flashing white sunlight to a beach from which more than one furtive eye watched. Every hour, Jonathan was there at the side of each of his students, demonstrating, suggesting, pressuring, guiding. He flew with them through night and cloud and storm, for the sport of it, while the flock huddled miserably on the ground. When the flying was done, the students relaxed in the sand, and in time they listened more closely to Jonathan. He had some crazy ideas that they couldn't understand, but then he had some good ones that they could. Gradually, in the night, another circle formed around the circle of students, a circle of curious gulls listening in the darkness for hours on end, not wishing to see or be seen by one another, fading away before daybreak. It was a month after the return of the first gull of the flock that the first gull of the flock crossed the line and asked to learn how to fly. In his asking, Terence Lowell Gull became a condemned bird, labeled outcast, and the eighth of Jonathan's students. The next night from the flock came Kirk Maynard Gull, wobbling across the sand, dragging his left wing to collapse at Jonathan's feet. "Help me," he said very quietly, speaking in the way that the dying speak. I want to fly more than anything else in the world." "Come along then," said Jonathan. "Climb with me away from the ground and we'll begin." "You don't understand. My wing. I can't move my wing." "Maynard Gull, you have the freedom to be yourself, your true self here and now, and nothing can stand in your way. It is the law of the great gull, the law that is." "Are you saying I can fly?" "I say you are free." As simply and as quickly as that, Kirk Maynard Gull spread his wings effortlessly and lifted into the dark night air. The flock was roused from sleep by his cry, as loud as he could scream it from 500 feet up. "I can fly! Listen, I can fly!" By sunrise, there were nearly 1,000 birds standing outside the circle of students, looking curiously at Maynard. They didn't care whether they were seen or not, and they listened, trying to understand Jonathan Seagull. He spoke of very simple things, that it is right for a gull to fly, that freedom is the very nature of his being, that whatever stands against that freedom must be set aside, be it ritual or superstition or limitation in any form. "Set aside," came a voice from the multitude, "even if it be the law of the flock. The only true law is that which leads to freedom," Jonathan said. There is no other. How do you expect us to fly as you fly?" came another voice. "You are special and gifted and divine above other birds. Look at Fletcher, Lowell, Charles Rowland, Judy Lee. Are they not also special and gifted and divine? No more than you are, no more than I am. The only difference, the very only one, is that they have begun to understand what they really are and have begun to practice it." His students, say Fletcher, shifted uneasily. They hadn't realized that this was what they were doing. The crowd grew larger every day, coming to question, to idolize, to scorn. They are saying in the flock that you are not the son of the great gull himself, Fletcher told Jonathan one morning after advanced speed practice, that you are 1,000 years ahead of your time. Jonathan sighed. The price of being misunderstood, he thought. They call you devil or they call you God. What do you think, Fletch? Are we ahead of our time? A long silence. Well, this kind of flying has always been here to be learned by anybody who wanted to discover it. That's got nothing to do with time. We're ahead of the fashion, maybe. Ahead of the way that most gulls fly. That's something, Jonathan said, rolling to glide inverted for a while. That's not half as bad as being ahead of our time. It happened just a week later. Fletcher was demonstrating the elements of high-speed flying to a class of new students. He had just pulled out of his dive from 7,000 feet, a long gray streak firing a few inches above the beach, when a young bird on its first flight glided directly into his path, calling for its mother. With 1/10 of a second to avoid the youngster, Fletcher Lynn's Seagull snapped hard to the left at something over 200 miles an hour into a cliff of solid granite. It was for him as though the rock were a giant hard door into another world, a burst of fear and shock and black as he hit. And then he was adrift in a strange, strange sky, forgetting, remembering, forgetting, afraid and sad and sorry, terribly sorry. The voice came to him as it had in the first day that he had met Jonathan Livingston Seagull. The trick, Fletcher, is that we are trying to overcome our limitations in order, patiently. We don't tackle flying through rock until a little later in the program. Jonathan, also known as the son of the great gull, his instructor said dryly. What are you doing here? The cliff. Didn't I die? Oh, Fletch, come on, think. If you were talking to me now, then obviously you didn't die, did you? What you did manage to do was to change your level of consciousness rather abruptly. It's your choice now. You can stay here and learn on this level, which is quite a bit higher than the one you left, by the way. Or you can go back and keep working with the flock. The elders were hoping for some kind of disaster, but they're startled that you oblige them so well. I want to go back to the flock, of course. I've barely begun with this new group. Very well, Fletcher. Remember what we were saying about one's body being nothing more than thought itself? Fletcher shook his head and stretched his wings and opened his eyes at the base of the cliff in the center of the whole flock assembled. There was a great clamor of squawks and screes from the crowd when he first moved. He lives! He that was dead lives! Touched him with a wingtip, brought him to life, the son of the great gull. No, he denies it. He's a devil. Devil, come to break the flock. There were 4,000 gulls in the crowd, frightened at what happened, and the cry, devil, went through them like a wind of an ocean storm. Eyes glazed, beaks sharp, they closed in to destroy. Would you feel better if we left, Fletcher? Asked Jonathan. I certainly wouldn't object too much if we did. Instantly, they stood together a half mile away and the flashing beaks of the mob closed on empty air. Why is it, Jonathan puzzled, that the hardest thing in the world is to convince a bird that he is free, and that he can prove it for himself if he just spend a little time practicing? Why should that be so hard? Fletcher still blinked from the change of scene. What did you just do? How did we get here? You did say you wanted to be out of the mob, didn't you? Yes, but how did you? Like everything else, Fletcher, practice. By morning, the flock had forgotten its insanity, but Fletcher had not. Jonathan, remember what you said a long time ago about loving the flock enough to return to it and help it learn? Sure. I don't understand how you manage to love a mob of birds that has just tried to kill you. Oh, Fletch, you don't love that. You don't love hatred and evil, of course. You have to practice and see the real gull, the good in every one of them, and to help them see it in themselves. That's what I meant by love. It's fun when you get the knack of it. I remember a fierce young bird, for instance, Fletcher Lynn Seagull, his name, just been made outcast, ready to fight the flock to the death, getting a start on building his own bitter hell out on the far cliffs. And here he is today, building his own heaven instead, and leading the whole flock in that direction. Fletcher turned to his instructor, and there was a moment of fright in his eyes. Me leading? What do you mean, me leading? You're the instructor here. You couldn't leave. Couldn't I? Don't you think that there might be other flocks, other Fletchers, that need an instructor more than this one, that's on its way toward the light? Me? John, I'm just a plain seagull, and you're the only son of the great gull, I suppose? Jonathan sighed and looked out to sea. You don't need me any longer. You need to keep finding yourself a little more each day. That real, unlimited Fletcher Seagull. He's your instructor. You need to understand him and to practice him. A moment later, Jonathan's body wavered in the air, shimmering, and began to go transparent. Don't let them spread silly rumors about me or make me a god. Okay, Fletch? I'm a seagull. I like to fly, maybe. Jonathan! Poor Fletch. Don't believe what your eyes are telling you. All they show is limitation. Look with your understanding. Find out what you already know, and you'll see the way to fly. The shimmering stopped. Jonathan Seagull had vanished into empty air. After a time, Fletcher Gull dragged himself into the sky and faced a brand new group of students eager for their first lesson. To begin with, he said heavily, you've got to understand that a seagull is an unlimited idea of freedom, an image of the great gull, and your whole body, from wingtip to wingtip, is nothing more than your thought itself. The young gulls looked at him quizzically. Hey man, they thought, this doesn't sound like a rule for a loop. Fletcher sighed and started over. Very well, he said, and eyed them critically. Let's begin with level flight. And saying that, he understood all at once that his friend had quite honestly been no more divine than Fletcher himself. No limits, Jonathan, he thought. Well, then the time's not distant when I'm going to appear out of thin air on your beach and show you a thing or two about flying. And though he tried to look properly severe for his students, Fletcher Seagull suddenly saw them all as they really were, just for a moment. And he more than liked. He loved what he saw. No limits, Jonathan, he thought, and he smiled. His race to learn had begun. That's the end of our wonderful reading of Jonathan Livingston Seagull. I had wanted to continue our spiritual story time, but we are actually now, for these next days, in preparation for our Germany retreat, our Zoom retreat. And so maybe after the retreat, if things are still about approximately the same, I would like to begin again. And I've enjoyed both of these books, and I actually have a very small stack of interesting short books that I would like to read. So I'll say good night for this time, many blessings, and please stay healthy and happy, and see you soon.